Hey everyone, welcome. It's Tuesday. Sorry, I'm standing up today because I feel like I've been sitting down a lot lately and I just feel like I need to stretch. So, I hope everyone's having a really good day. Just giving some space for people to hear that we're online. As you guys know, Tuesday morning for me is a chance to have a conversation with somebody in our electorate who has something that I can learn from, and I think information that we can all, really value from hearing. So this morning I'm pretty excited because we're going to be talking about the really important issues of voter engagement and voter participation, and we're also going to be talking about what's going on at the moment in terms of local council elections, because what I found, and it's not surprising at all, but what I found is that, in the last couple of weeks when I go out, people have been asking me, what level of government are you actually running for? And it's not a silly question. I think Australia, we are very fortunate to live in the country we live in terms of the participative democracy that we have. But with that, sometimes, if you're a first-time voter, it's a lot to get your head around. And not even if you're just a first-time voter. I've been voting for a really long time now, so 30 years actually, and I still sometimes just have to check with myself what, level of government we're talking about, in terms of who may have responsibility for what, and the opportunity that might be in front of us as voters to actually make a difference in our electorate. So this morning, and I'm just waiting, there he is, I'm going to bring an really incredible gentleman into the call with me, Dan. So let me just let him in. I'll be very happily having a cup of tea with him and a bit of a chat for the next 15 to 20 minutes. There you are. Hey, Dan.
Hello, how are you going?
I'm really good. I'm all the better for seeing you, actually. How was your weekend?
Good, busy. I feel like the race to the end of the year is very on, so the weekends keep getting busier.
I know, it's crazy. So I was just thinking, do you realise we're only 25 days till Christmas?
Yeah, the tree is ready to go.
Oh! You're doing better than me. I think I'm having a tree delivered on the weekend. So I've decided to go a real tree this year, which is something I only do about once every 10 years. But yeah, I just thought I'm going to be around this whole sort of summer. So I thought it'd be nice just to have that feeling of, organic nature in the house and stuff. So Dan, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I'm really, really looking forward to this conversation because I know, obviously, as a North Sydney electorate resident, but also a lawyer, you've got and a member of KT Next Gen, you've got some great, observations in terms of what's going on around your friendship circle, and I'm keen to talk to you about it. But can you just help? So I can see we've got quite a few people on this morning, which is great. Good morning, everybody. Clearly, this topic is, hitting a nerve with people. Can you just introduce yourself to everyone, Dan, and tell them a little bit about who you are and your background?
Sure thing. So my name's Dan. I'm a resident of North Sydney. I live in Lane Cove. I'm 26 years old and I'm a lawyer. And so I work in the PD, but, as part of my general interests, but also my education, we study all things politics because my other degree is in politics, and also, constitutional law level. So you've got federal, state, local, and how that all fits together. So I think from get-go, I had an interest in this whole space. As I've gotten older, and I'm 3 years into working now, and I'm wondering, where's my tax money going?
Good question, Dan. Very good question.
Interest in local as well. So yeah, it's picking up around here because the elections are the 4th of December. So rapidly.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
and I mean, and that's a good point. So when you say the elections are the 4th of December, what elections are we actually talking about? What level of government are we talking about?
actually talking about local council. So,
Mm.
you know, which is not what you're running for, is it?
No, it's not what I'm running for, but it's fascinating actually. I think the minute you get involved in any sort of discussion around politics and what's going on, in your local community, I think it's often really hard for people to be able to understand the difference between the varying levels of government. And, not just for those of us that were born here, people who have emigrated to Australia. I have Kiwi friends who have no idea how our electoral system works. They don't understand it because each country is unique. But Dan, the reason I was so interested in talking to you today, and everyone needs to know all this is being thrown at Dan with no forewarning. So this is a conversation over a cup of tea. I just realised that I was doing a little bit of research before our call. So according to the latest electoral roll, 82% of the people aged between 18 and 24 in Australia at the moment are enrolled to vote. So there's a whole group of people there that haven't even actually enrolled yet.
Yeah.
But when you look at that group in terms of the percentage that are enrolled, in the last elections, we had the lowest participatory rate that we'd had in elections since voting became compulsory in Australia. Like, our participatory rates were down at about 82% across the electorate. And there's I was online, I was reading lots of stuff about, younger Australians feeling disengaged, feeling frustrated that they're not, their opinions aren't valued. And I just wondered, as someone who is in that kind of generational perspective, I'm really interested in hearing your personal perspective on what's going on with younger Australians at the moment and their participation in democracy.
Totally. And I think that's something that, among my circles, like, I'm quite lucky to be surrounded by people who are quite engaged and, like, we like to talk about these things. But even in that sort of context, you hear people about, because the non-participatory voters, that kind of number, it's not just people not turning, trying to avoid a fine or just paying. People, making the vote ineligible somehow deliberately, by doing something that it's not counted. So these are people who, are looking up and ahead of us, and stations that people our age don't really often fill. And, we've spoken about it a little bit before, but it's kind of that sentiment of like, when are these people going to get out of the way and, get in? And, there's a little bit of that. So I think that's why I'm interested by this movement, which you're very much at the front of, which is this kind of independent, more grassroots type movement where you can look forward and say, okay, this person has their ear to the ground and it's really exciting. So I think, not all bad.
Well, it's interesting actually, and I want to just double back because I was having a conversation recently with a group of young people, and we started talking about a donkey vote. And sort of half the people in the group didn't actually realise what a donkey vote is. But, if people haven't heard about it on our chat this morning, a donkey vote is basically when you turn up, because you've got to turn up, because otherwise there could be a fine in place. But then you don't actually vote in a meaningful way. So you, deliberately write across your ballot paper, or you put in numbers that don't make sense. And actually, again, those informal votes, those donkey votes, were one of the highest rates that we've seen in the last 100 years in our last kind of election process. And what do you think it is about those informal votes? What does that say about what's going on for again, younger voters?
Yeah, they just don't really think that there matters, and they by throwing one in the top box and 6 or 8 or whatever bottom box and filling the rest in between, they're just whether my vote goes this way or this way, kind of just letting go of this whole process because it's, either it's not serving my purposes or, I just don't have faith that it's going to matter. So,
well, you know what? we're going to take a giant leap, and we're going to assume right now that anybody who is watching this morning, or who may watch it later, actually is really interested in understanding what's going on in democracy. And I think, for me, Dan, this is a massive part of why I'm running. I actually think what's really exciting about the way the Australian system works is that if we're unhappy with how we are currently in the political environment, we just need to accept that we've created it, because it's our votes that have put these people into the positions they have. What's exciting about that is that if we created it, we can recreate it, into an image of something that we're happier with, that we think better represents us. So I want to talk a little bit about, you said this weekend is the local council elections are coming up. So from your perspective, Dan, what are you seeing amongst your friends and family about their understanding of, what local council is all about?
Yeah, I don't think people really know that much about what they actually do, other than maybe, when roads get, lights put up and all the rest of it, that whole urban planning side of things, on, what else kind of goes into it. And in terms of who are on the councils, I don't think people really know, are surprised to see the parties running, because they still run at the local council level. And then also you have a kind of a swathe of people who call themselves, identify as independents as well. So, yeah, I think there are lots of questions to be answered, for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting, because what strikes me about the local council elections is actually, in many ways, this is the level of government that has day-to-day impact on us. So local council government, as you just said, it's about the development that's happening in your community. It's about the protection of the green spaces and the public spaces. It's about parking in your community. And I think what's really interesting is that often I think people kind of overlook local council election. They kind of go, oh, okay, well, I'm not really sure what that does. But it's a really important level of government, isn't it?
Person, even things like and housing, we're seeing, more this kind of housing get more and more out of hand from our perspective. We're just starting out and we're thinking, how's that ever going to happen? And, things like urban development around your kind of, town centres, it directly affects people our age, in terms of finding affordable and in with all the amenities. So definitely something that a lot of people, especially young people, should pay close attention to.
Yeah, well, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about our electorate now, because I think personally, the other thing I find quite confusing, and I'm very happy to own this, is that your electorates, so whatever electorate you sit in, actually changes with whatever election you're going into, So as we go into these local council elections, I actually sit within the local council of Willoughby. So, but I know we actually have 4 councils that cover the entire space that is the federal electorate of North Sydney. So, we've got North Sydney itself. So there is a council area which has exactly the same name as our federal seat. We have Willoughby, which is where I am. We have Lane Cove, and we have Hunters Hill, which is where Lane Cove, yeah. And I think what's really interesting then is, you then have within each of those local councils, people may have heard this word ward. And ward, yeah. And have you heard much about ward politics in your local council area at all, Dan?
So there's a little bit of, only because I kind of am a little bit tuned in, I've heard small things about the wards. And actually that's not something I really knew much about until last year, which is how local councils are split up among those electorates that you just spoke about. So, and I think people are familiar really with the areas because, in COVID we had LGA, the way that we kind of moved through that whole debacle and are still moving through. But yeah, the wards subdivide those council areas. And in Lane Cove, for example, we have an east, central and a west. And, the issues that affect ward can be slightly different. If one's closer to a highway or one's closer to, if there's a train station or the shops, you know, and the kind of issues that then inform the issues that councillors for those wards take to the council can change. So.
Well, and I think the other thing that's really interesting about our councillors is that, you know, most of our councillors have jobs in the real world. Yeah, like you don't run for local politics for the money. It's certainly not. It's something that people often do as a second kind of role in their life, and they do it because they are motivated to see their local community do really well. I just want to circle back to what you said about understanding what the local council members that may be putting themselves forward to you, how you get your head around, you know, what they're standing for. And again, Dan, you know, have you witnessed much going on in your local council area, or where are you finding you get your information from?
Honestly, my biggest source of information are the letters that are dropped in my letterbox. And when they are from sorry if there's banging, the one day that
it's okay.
So yeah, getting flyers from independents or from, you know, Labor, Liberal, that kind of thing. And I'm interested to actually hear, you know, what real impact independents can have in, you know, a local council context when parties like Labor or the Liberals are running things.
Yeah, well, you know what, Dan, actually, I think there's two really important points to make there. So the first is that local council is a little bit of a different area in many places, because you can actually be a member of a political party and run for local council election, but you don't need to declare, in terms of you don't need to promote yourself as a party member. So I think one of the things, and I put my hand up, I wasn't super sensitive to this until this latest round of elections. And, you know, yes, I am seeing it from a completely new perspective with my eyes on, in terms of what I'm doing now and the things I'm learning and observing about politics. I think one of the things to be really aware of when you're voting in your local elections is just because somebody claims that they're independent, it doesn't actually necessarily mean they are. I went to a community meeting recently in my local area where I had, you know, a number of candidates stand up and speak to the group that was gathered, because I was really interested in understanding what these people want to see done. But what really surprised me actually was the number of people who actually said, well, yes, on my ticket it says I'm independent, but I myself am a member of blah party, or, you know, I have two people that are running on my independent ticket who are a member of blah party. And, you know, I do qualify it by saying every single person that raised that within the context of the meeting then went on to say, but I can honestly say I've never been asked to vote in a particular way. You know, I've never been told I have to vote a particular way. But the thing that actually really concerned me is that part of their sell was, so the fact I'm a member of this party will make it easier for me to work with the state government, or it'll make it easier for me to get grants for our local area. And I was really struck by this idea that these people don't actually even realise that what they're saying is really wrong. It shouldn't matter what party you're a member of in terms of what work gets done in your community. You know, a fair and unbiased conversation and decision-making process, it should be based on merit and community need. So I know I got fascinated by it, and I've got to say there are two resources that I found that I didn't know existed. Again, you know, like I think with you guys, I'm learning too along the way, yeah? But there's two I found that I think are really worth checking out. So the first one is a government website. So there is a government website, and I'll put it in the notes after our live this morning, and it's elections, so elections.newsouthwales.gov.au. And when you go in there, what you can actually do is type in your full address, and it gives you the exact details of what local council area you're in and what ward you're in. And then what you can do is actually click through, and you can get access to the information on all the people who are running. And you can even go down to the level of where they've had to do their PDF form, which is declaring who they are and where they work, and you know, that of that transparency. Now, to me, that was the start of something, because actually I was really disappointed when I went through on that website last night. Sometimes you can just click through to the PDF and it's just a signature. It really doesn't tell you anything about the person. And in fact, someone I found last night is running for a seat in one of our local council areas, but has an address in Canberra. So I'm not quite sure how that works. But then the other thing that I think has been amazing, and actually we've seen it here in North Sydney more successfully than any other place in the country, and that is there's a group in North Sydney called the Voices of North Sydney. Mm-hmm. Now, I think they have established themselves on the lines of the federal electorate, so they are a much wider, scoping area than just the council election of North Sydney. But they actually offered the opportunity to councillors to sign a Declaration of Independence, for want of a better word. And they've produced a table now that you can actually go into and visit on their website. And you can find that it's literally voices@northsydney, all lowercase, .org. And you can see, again, who's running in your ward, in your council area, and, what alliances they've had, or, what they've declared about themselves. Now, it's not perfect. It's certainly not perfect, but at least it gives you a place to start.
Yeah, and better than voting for someone based on the neatness of their signature on the form.
It's quite crazy, isn't it? I think funding
as well that flows through local councils. There are resources there that, in the right hands can be used for, so much growth and, pushing our community so much further forward. So it's kind of shocking to hear that, the people who are putting up sometimes, not always, there are some really great people out there running, putting themselves forward, bringing their community passion into it. But yeah, for the others who, don't even provide much information, it's hard.
And I think that comes back to that idea I know we've discussed a number of times around the reason I'm running, and it really is about integrity, isn't it? It's integrity and transparency and capacity to be comfortable standing in truth. And I think it does speak to how our system has really become this kind of perversion of party politics, rather than a true expression of people's right to be heard, people's voices. That, to me, government is about the people. That's what it should be about. It shouldn't be about, the party mandate. And I do think that it does start at that council level. I think there's a real opportunity for us all, if we want to see a new political system in Australia, which is built on integrity and transparency and capacity to move our nation forward. It's a real opportunity for us to take that seriously right from the get-go, isn't it? Right at that council level.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm curious to know how you would, if you are elected next year, which is going to be, how would you work with local councils?
Yeah, look, I think they're an incredibly powerful source of information, and I think to me it's a starting point for access to what's really going on in the communities. Councils are closer to the actual day-to-day issues in a community than any other level of government. And so it would be, I will work with those that are fortunate enough to be given an opportunity to run in council, whatever background they come from. As the federal representative for the North Sydney electorate, it would be my job to make sure I understand what those councils are seeking to do within their community, and that as often as possible, if I can be of assistance, around enabling advocacy for the area, or perhaps, assisting with getting access to grants and getting support. And it's really interesting. I actually feel like, for me, one of the biggest things I would see it as my role is to help build the case for, the work that needs to be done, or the opportunities that we believe we have across our federal electorate. Because, there's also, with the different levels of government, there's different levels of funding. Yeah, so there's our council rates, there's then our state government funding, and there's our federal government funding that can trickle down. So I think for me, it's about helping our councils navigate the process to get the best possible outcome they can. And at times, you know, there are certain, and you would know this, Dan, I'm sure everyone on the call knows this, there are certain things that fall into certain buckets of government. Yeah. So as we've talked a little bit about what is the responsibility of local governments, you know, you then go to state, and often at that state level, you see the responsibility of health and infrastructure comes in. And then you go to the federal level and you see, you know, wide-scale legislative reform, aged care, childcare. And I think actually there's this really interesting project happening at the moment in the North Sydney electorate, which is the Northern Beaches Tunnel, you know, and the Western Harbour Tunnel. And what's fascinating about that project is that it technically is a state project. That's a state infrastructure project. Yet, I believe the council's opinions should be equally rated at that table because they're representing the people, you know, that are living this infrastructure project as in the here and now. And I also believe there's a role for the federal government to play in that because it's about integrity of process and transparency in process. So while I know that we often talk about the different levels of government having different responsibilities, I actually think ultimately a great system interlaces, and work together collaboratively to get the best result for the people living in the area.
Totally agree. And I think probably being independent helps you do that in so many ways than it would be if your allegiances were tied somewhere. You know, you're not worried about point scoring at another level or you know, supporting something might blow back on you, you know, on a bigger level at the next, you know, that kind of thing. You know, you're able to actually hear out whoever it is who's come up with a great idea, a valid issue, the freedom to kind of say, yes, absolutely. Let's work on that together and try and fix it.
You know what I think, actually, you've just reminded me. So there wouldn't be a person in our country who hasn't watched what's gone on in Canberra, you know, last week, where it seemed to be a bit of a dishevelment down there. But I think, just to pick up on what you just said, the power of an independent is that you have permission to argue like you know you're right, but to listen like you know you're wrong. And what I find fascinating about independence in politics is that you do become the conduit for negotiation around opportunities, you know, and we saw that last week when Helen Haynes, you know, moved to have debate on the Integrity Commission legislation. That move, thanks to a very brave Liberal Party member who crossed the floor, resulted in winning the debate in the House that day. You know, that debate should have gone ahead, but because of a procedural technicality, which is actually the result of what the current government is doing, it wasn't allowed to proceed. And then we saw what I think is actually this really disappointing process afterwards about how that MP was treated within her own party for having had the courage to stand up and cross the floor. So I do think independents play a really important role in breaking what I think has become one of the biggest weaknesses in our Australian political system, which is we have a political system at the moment that seems to be obsessed with winning or losing. You either win or you lose in Australia when it comes to politics at the moment. And to me, that serves nobody. The ideal situation in politics is that you bring the voices and the hearts of the people into one location and then you work it out together. You know, it shouldn't matter what team you're standing on. You get to the best result that you can for the community. And that's independence. That's what they do. And, you know,
independent, you know, that wouldn't have been the kind of wake-up call that set the cat amongst the pigeons and actually inspired from within one of those parties to cross the floor and say, yes, this is an issue that, you know, give them the freedom to say, you know, sure, like I want to vote for this issue because that's how I feel and that's how my constituents feel. And I think it's the independents that have the power to really wake that process up, for sure.
Yeah, and it's a respect thing, isn't it? Because I think the other thing that I would comment on is that as an independent, you're answerable to your community and your own conscience, yeah? Whereas when I watch people, and I heard this, I met with some people on Saturday and they were talking about one of the local councils. What they actually talked about was punitive action. So when you're a member of a club or a team and you don't play the way that club or team wants you to play, there can be consequences, and they can be really uncomfortable, nasty consequences, and I think time and time again, I hear stories from people that say, I received this call or this text message telling me, don't do that, you'll be sorry, or this is the way we're going, toe the line. And I think that's the place where we need to shed light. And again, I think that's where a move towards independent voices at any level of government, at council, at state level, at federal level, really comes in and says, well, I mean, I guess to a certain extent, maybe we're the referees. Like we're not on one team or the other team. We're just here to make sure there's a really good game being played and that the rules are being followed. And I just think, that would have to be a good thing no matter what level of government you're in. So, Dan, how are we going to what would be your call out to people under the age of 26, your ripe old age? How do we call them out and say, get to the polls this weekend? The election is this Saturday for local councils. What do they need to do?
They need to get online, have a Google, learn a little bit about where you live and how it's divided and, when you can get to the polls. Because you can also, if you've got plans on a Saturday, you can early vote too, like it's possible. And I just think people need to do some research and remember that there are some issues for us. We're worried about the housing. This is a chance for us to kind of weigh in, learn a little bit, and use our vote, because it does count. It really does, especially because a lot of these ward areas are not very big. Actually, ways you've got more power in a local council setting with your vote than maybe you would elsewhere. So I think it's a really cool opportunity for people to learn a little bit more and vote for how they want their local community to be.
I could not have said it better. This is about, do you have artificial turf on your oval or do you have grass on your oval? This is about, do you have a car park that is just cement or do you have a project like Lane Cove's Canopy project? This is real world, real stuff. And the last thing I'd say is that, I think at the moment, if you don't vote, okay, the cash fine is about $50, I think, at the moment. But the actual opportunity cost is you ending up living in a community that you're dissatisfied with, and I think, no, that's worth so much more than a $50, note. So, guys, get out there. Don't just be frustrated. Actually get out there. Have your say, make your vote count, make sure you fill in the ballot form correctly, make that vote count, your voice count, and play a really active role in how the environment around you is being shaped, and then keep going. We've got school strikes, we've got Facebook groups, we've got this whole uprising.
Jen.
Oh, we've got Kylea Tink next gen. We do. We've got KT next gen. Come, get involved, and let's actually be the difference we want to see at our local level. So, thank you, Dan. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. So, everyone, yes, we focused this morning on people who are under the age of 26 in our electorate. Really encouraging you to actually use your voice. It's not an obligation. It's not a daggy responsibility. And I know it might seem a little bit overwhelming sometimes with everything else that's going on. But even if you just take that one moment to think about what are the 2 or 3 things I'd really like in my community to make my life a little bit easier, go looking for the candidates who are talking about that, and then mindfully cast your vote for those candidates so that you get the council that you want to see. And then once the council elections are over on the weekend, we are back in full swing in terms of advocating for a new future for Australia in Canberra, and really getting a very changed climate down there in Canberra. So I'll be out voting on the weekend, and I hope to see lots of you there. So until then, thanks, Dan, and thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll catch you again same time next Tuesday. Okay, bye.
Authorised by Kylea Tink, North Sydney, New South Wales.